Hey, I'm Jesse with ncfishes.com, and today I'm going to show you how to build this basic photo tank so you can start taking pictures of fish. Let's get started. For the frame of this tank, we're going to need a piece of PVC lumber 1.5 inches wide. I had some already in my garage that was too wide, so I'm ripping it down to size on the table saw. You can skip this step if you buy some the correct width to begin with. PVC lumber is super soft and prone to defects, so square up one end before you take any measurements. Once that's done, you're ready to lay out your measurements and begin making your cuts. We're going to need 3 pieces for this frame, one that's 8 3/4 inches long, another that's 8 3/4 inches long, and one that's 10 1/4 inches long. A cut list is provided below. Since I'm using old PVC lumber that's just been laying in my garage, I'm going to use a sander to clean up the dirt and any other imperfections in it that might cause problems later on in the build. If you don't have access to a sander, this step isn't critical, so don't worry about it. For actually assembling these frames, we're going to use a quick setting 2-part epoxy. We normally use PVC cement for this part of the job, but I had a ton of epoxy laying around, so I decided to use it instead. To be honest, the strength of this joint really isn't all that important. You're really just using it to try to hold the pieces of the frame together while you're putting the glass on. The glass is actually what provides the structural integrity to the tank. You do want to make sure that you use enough epoxy or PVC cement though to fill in all of the gaps in the joint. This will help ensure that it's waterproof. You can see here that as I tighten the clamps, the pieces have a tendency to shift around a little bit, so I'm making sure that everything stays flush, and I'm also wiping out all of the squeeze out that occurs as I tighten the clamp. You'll also notice that I added a 4th piece to the top of the tank. That piece will be removed later. It's just making sure that everything stays square. Once the epoxy has dried, I can remove the clamp and check the frame for squareness. If it lays flat on the table, everything is square. Now I'm going to add another piece of wood to the bottom of the tank for holding it to a table with squeeze clamps. To attach this piece, you guessed it, I'm going to use epoxy again. While this piece isn't actually necessary, if you are going to put it on your tank, make sure to use plenty of epoxy. You don't want this joint breaking and your tank falling over while you're taking photos. The exact width of this piece doesn't really matter, but I generally like to have at least 2 inches on each side of the tank. That gives you plenty of space to put a squeeze clamp or maybe even a flash if you wanted to. And just like before, when you're putting these clamps on, make sure to wipe away any squeeze out and check to make sure all edges are flush. Now that the epoxy has cured, I'm ready to remove the clamps and check one last time to make sure that everything is square. This one looks good, so I'm ready to spray paint it black. The exact black paint you use doesn't really matter. You just want to make certain that it's not a glossy black. For this build, I'm going to use a satin Rust-Oleum. In other words, a flat black. You might be asking yourself, why paint the inside of the tank black? The answer to that is control. We want to be the ones in control of exactly how much light reaches the shadow areas of the fish. With the tank white like this, all the light that we shine from above will bounce back and fill in those shadows. We don't want that. For this size tank, we use the cheapest picture frame glass we can find. I think this frame was actually only $1.22. You just can't beat that. But for a tank any bigger than this one, you're probably going to want to buy thicker, more expensive glass. To actually attach the glass to the frame, you guessed it again, I'm going to use that same 2-part epoxy, but unlike before, I'm going to be super careful about where I put it and how much I use. Too much, and it will squeeze out, get on the glass, and get in the way of your photos. In this step, I'm kind of just using the epoxy to hold the glass in place. I'll actually get to the water sealing in the next step. Now that both panes of glass are epoxied in place, I can focus on water sealing. To do this, I'll put a layer of epoxy overlaying the edge of the glass in the frame. Not only does this make for a waterproof seal, it also makes for a very durable connection. The fish we photograph tend to live in out-of-the-way places, and we've had problems in the past with our glass coming off of the frames while we're bouncing around dirt roads. This method sort of sandwiches the glass in between the epoxy and the frame, and it eliminates many of the problems we used to have. Unfortunately, it's not very elegant looking. Oh well, looks aren't everything. Alright, well that's it. The tank's done. All that's left to do now is test it out and see if it actually holds water. So let's give it a try. and it looks good. I don't see any water coming out anywhere. No bubbles or anything. No wetness seeping out. Well, it looks like this tank build was a success. Now let's go take some pictures of fish.